It's ideology rather than financial prudence that seems to be driving the present government. So, for example, the uh, nursery places, the preschool children's places, is all in chaos because there's not funding to deal with it. But at the same time, the story emerges that Rishi Sunak was not a great fan of Rwanda, was not a great fan of moving migrants out of hotels into other accommodation because hotels were actually cheaper than making this big issue about Bibi Stockholm and so on. And he resisted these things when he was Chancellor, and now he's become Prime Minister. He's embraced the ideology of the ERG, the Tufton Street diktat. But it's not enough. It's not enough for these great sort of prophets of doom like Jenrick. So Jenrick is now considering leading a rebellion against Rishi Sunak, precisely because Rishi Sunak is not a dyed-in-the-wool ideologue. Well, I thought we knew that anyway, number one. And just for the, every so often I think I feel sympathy for Rishi Sunak. I've always thought I sort of like him. And the evidence of this last year has convinced me that I don't. And yet there's a sneaking suspicion that there's something vulnerable and rather sweet about him. And that in the end he sort of cries out to be loved. You think of Maria von Trapp. Oh, just love them, Captain, just love them. And Jenrick, Jenrick's someone else who I always sort of hoped for more. And what I've seen is that he's a sort of pale copy of Dominic Raab. And I don't like what I saw in Dominic Raab, and I don't like what I see in Jenrick. I think they're both shits. And I think their behaviour has been proven to be wrong. Raab particularly, idling away in Crete while Afghanistan burned, and claiming that he wasn't in fact skiing or surfing or whatever he claimed to be doing, or whatever other people claimed to be doing, because the beach was closed. Well, we know from evidence from Greek weather surveys that there was no beach closure on that day, that the weather was fine, that there were no storms, there was nothing to close the beach. There were a few places where forest fires had closed roads. That was the sum of the closures in that area on that day. He was lying because his ideology that he was entitled to a holiday, whatever happened, was more important than his responsibility for the nation and for the people in his care. When you become a senior politician, you take responsibility seriously. If you don't, you get out of the job. And there's always somebody else who is willing to shoulder that responsibility. But I'm afraid the present government is more interested in ideology and feathering its own nest, putting hay in the attic or whatever they want to call it, than in taking proper responsibility. And I'm afraid that is how it appears to me Jenrick has become. That is certainly how Raab became. It didn't surprise me at all that there were allegations about bullying against Raab. Not at all. Nor indeed that they were found to be fairly substantial. And it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me about Priti Patel. When ideology takes over from basic humanity, when people forget why they went into politics, they become greedy and thoughtless and cruel and self-serving. And that's the point at which they should stop. because they have been ruined as individuals by the job that I'm sure they took on with the very best intentions. Now, if Rishi Sunak could cast his mind back, I don't think his reasons for disapproving of Rwanda, his reasons for disapproving of moving people out of hotels are terribly noble. But they're better than his ideological pandering to the very worst of Tufton Street, to the very worst of this rhetoric that demonizes people and that uses migrants as a distraction for the failure of government policies. Anyway, I thought it was interesting that Jenrick is planning to base his entire revolt on the fact that Rishi was at one point opposed to Rwanda. You wouldn't know that now, would you, really?